The Birdie Board Podcast is brought to you by the Birdie Board app, the easiest way to track matches, scores, and handicaps with friends. Now, here's your host, Corey, with another episode of the Birdie Board Podcast.
Welcome to episode 24 of the Birdie Board Podcast. I only have one more until I reach my goal of 25 episodes. That's almost a half a year of recording. I think technically I'll hit half a year when I hit 27 episodes because there was 1 week that I did 2 episodes. So just 26 isn't going to be enough. So we're getting close to half a year of the Birdie Board Podcast, which is pretty exciting. But still, 24 episodes is a lot. My wife was telling me there's a statistic, something like most podcasts don't go past 3 or 4 episodes. So the fact that we're on 24 now is something I'm pretty proud of. Another big accomplishment that's on the horizon is 250 podcast downloads. We're at 235 currently, so I think we're going to be able to hit 250 in maybe the next podcast or two, depending on how lucky we get with the downloads. So recently I had a Facebook video go a little bit viral. So it had 70,000 views. That is a lot more than what I typically get on any of my videos, which can range anywhere between 200 views and 1,000 views, depending on the platform. What was interesting to me is why I think this probably got some traction is it was about course rating and slope rating. And what's interesting about this topic is it's a area of golf that I think a lot of golfers don't understand. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think that's what draws people in and what makes them interested in it. And I thought, well, let's talk about a lot of those types of topics on this podcast. So in previous podcasts, I've talked about course rating and slope rating already. So I'm not going to go over those. Maybe I'll bring it back up in a couple podcasts from now. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is score differential. And this is probably one of the newest things that I've learned recently. And what is score differential? Well, it's a number that is trying to tell you how you did on a course, irregardless of the difficulty of it. So to put in an example, imagine you play at 2 separate courses and you shot a 90 at both of those courses. Well, how do you know which one is actually the better 80 or the better 90 score? That's where score differential comes in, and it's an equation that can tell you which one of those 90s is actually the better round. And it takes things like the course rating and the slope rating and puts it all into this formula and gives you a number. And the lower that number is, the better you did on that round. So if you put your 90s in and one course came back with a score differential of a 9, the other course came back with a score differential of a 7, that second number is 7, which is lower than the 9, which means that is this 85 that is better. It accounts for course conditions too, if you wanted to, which we'll talk about in a second. But the formula is this. It's your gross score, so the actual score you get, minus the course rating, and then you multiply that by 113 divided by the slope rating. This is going to give you your score differential for that particular course and a number that you can use to compare all of your rounds to see which round did I play best. I talked about a really cool mechanic of this formula, which is how you can adjust your score based off of the conditions. So imagine if you're playing the same course 2 days in a row in 85 and 85. Let's say you shot 85 both days. And one day was the perfect conditions. It was sunny, nothing wrong. The next day was a torrential downpour and windy. Well, obviously, we're trying to figure out which one did you shoot better at. Well, if you shot 85 on both days and the second day was rainy and windy, well, it's probably pretty easy to think I played better on that day to be able to shoot 85 in those conditions. But this score differential formula, as I spoke about earlier, wouldn't account for that. So how would you account for that? Well, you can optionally add what's called a playing conditions calculation. It's PCC. It's a score from -1 to 3 that you can add or subtract from your adjusted gross score. So for that 85 that you shot with the rainy conditions and the windy conditions, depending on how bad you assess it to be, don't put 85 into this formula. Instead, put 87 or 88. Use this playing conditions calculation to adjust your score ever so slightly to account for these different conditions. I mentioned it starts at -1, a scenario I thought about that. Why would you use a -1? Well, I'm thinking I was playing a course one time, and our tee boxes that we were teeing off from it was just one of those big tee boxes, and there were fox on the tee box. Well, we were kind of standing there waiting for them to move off, and they just weren't moving off, so we didn't really want to go close because you never know. So what we did is we kind of went up in front of the tee box to the foot of the fairway, and we just teed off from there. Well, this is where I might want to subtract a stroke because I made that hole easier. So if I shot at 85 that day and then I went back the next day and shot another 85, but it was from the normal tee box, you would want your score differential to account for that. So that's where this PCC, the playing conditions calculations, comes into effect. If you're playing somewhere official, or maybe a course might give you the PCC for the day, definitely take note of that. Otherwise, you can kind of do your best guess and come up with it yourself. The reason these score differentials are very important is because it plays into the handicap index. And I will say this is something I got wrong in a previous podcast. What I said that was wrong was your handicap is the average of your lowest 8 rounds. That is not true. What it actually is it's the average of your 8 lowest score differentials from your last 20 rounds. So the difference is that I said is it's the 8 lowest rounds. It's not that. It's the 8 lowest score differentials, which is that equation we just talked about in the last section of this podcast. So once you know all your score differentials for the last 20 rounds, now you can take the top 8 and you average those together, and what you get in the end, you get a handicap index. And this handicap index is supposed to tell you how good is a golfer from a potential point of view. It's not trying to capture how good are they from an average point of view. It's trying to say, this is the golfer's potential. This is how good they could be at when they're playing really, really well. Now, this is not like, I would say this is just a little bit better than average. It's the 8 lowest, so it's 8 divided by 20. That's not quite 50%. So that kind of gives you an idea of like what really is it. It's about your top 40%. So if you're trying to figure out, well, how often should I shoot my average handicap? It's probably roughly around 40% of the time you should shoot it. So it's not like every other time you play out, but like you should shoot, if you play 5 rounds, roughly 2 of them should be near your handicap index, and then the other 3 might not. So it's not uncommon for like a 10 handicapper to constantly shoot in like the high 80s to 90s, even though 10, if you take like a par 72, a 10 handicap would say, okay, your potential is at 82. Well, you might only shoot close to an 82 2 out of 5 rounds. The other 3 rounds are going to be 85, 87, maybe even 90. And that's okay. That's the point of a handicap index, is it's not trying to measure your average, it's trying to measure your potential. Very important part, and it's all based off of your score differentials. So that's the understanding of a handicap index. Understand that's based off of that score differential that we talked about in the last section. So now that you have your handicap index, how do you use it? Well, your handicap index is a number, and what it's trying to tell you is how many strokes you get on the hardest holes on the golf course. So the easiest way to think about it is if you have an 18 handicap, you get 1 additional stroke on every hole. If you have a 9, you get an additional stroke on just the 9 hardest holes. So a lot of times what golfers assume is, believe it or not, and it's okay if it's you, is like the number 1 hardest hole is going to be the first one you play. The last one you play is going to be the easiest, and it just gets easier as the day goes on. That's not true. There is what's called a stroke index, sometimes called as the handicap index. And it's going to be another number on your scorecard that's not the order of the holes, that goes from 1 to 18. And what this is telling you is how difficult is the hole you're about to play. So 18 is going to be the easiest hole, 1 is going to be the hardest. And when you get, let's say, 10 strokes on a particular course, depending on your handicap, what it's saying is you get 10 strokes on the 10 hardest holes. So 1 through 10, your par would be 1 higher than what's actually on the scorecard. If you have a handicap over 18, what that means is you get a stroke on every hole, and then you get a stroke on another stroke on the 2 hardest holes. So you would actually get 2 strokes on the 2 hardest holes and 1 on all the rest. If you have a opposite handicap, so you have a plus handicap, let's say you're +2, the opposite actually happens. You actually lose strokes on the easiest holes. So if you have a 2 handicap and the calculations say you get 2 less strokes, on the 18th and 17th hole, you actually have a par 1 below what's listed. So if the 18th hole is a par 4, your new par would actually be a par 3. So you can see kind of how all of these systems are kind of working together to pull the golfers of different skill levels all down to about par so that they can have a competitive game. And with the potential of it, it shows, okay, well, if it was your average, then the competitiveness wouldn't mean as much. It's saying, okay, this is like if my average is 85, or let's say 15 over par, your average is 5 over par, our difference is 10, like you're not going to get much of a round. The cool thing about golf potential is like it doesn't say when your best rounds have to occur. You can do the math and say, okay, about 40% of the time I'm going to have a good round. Well, I guess in a way, like if you've had 5 bad rounds in a row, you're due for one, or you could be resetting your handicap. But what it's saying is like, okay, I am a 15 handicap. That is my potential. I need to lock in and shoot my handicap at 15. I'm going to course strategize. I'm really going to think about each hole. That's what I need to get. So that's the cool thing. Competitiveness is like it's still in your control to be able to shoot your potential. And this is something Tiger was so good at and Scotty is so good at, is like shooting your potential when it matters the most. Like both Tiger and Scotty, they've had their bad rounds throughout their career, but it seems like when majors roll around, that's when they're shooting their potentials. That's what you want to do with your handicap, is like when it matters the most, live up to your potential, live up to your handicap, shoot that number, and you're going to win every time. So transitioning away now from just the whole handicap system, the next topic here is ready golf. The traditional ordering of how you play is the winner of the previous hole is the one who tees off first, and then you go in the order of whoever got second, third, so on and so forth. And then once you're off the tee box, the person that's the furthest out is the one to go first. That is the traditional golf order. So what happened is this would cause pace of play problems because someone in the middle of the fairway, pretty far up, would be just waiting for someone looking for their ball when they could have gone ahead and gone. So this is where ready golf came in, and the concept is just to help pace of play. So what ready golf says is if it's safe to do so, go ahead and play your next shot. I think in general, most people play ready golf now, but if you're actually being affected by slow play, I would encourage you to jump back to your traditional ordering. Just to slow yourselves down a little bit, you have time, you have no reason to hit up on the people in front of you. You can take that time to play more traditional golf. If you're in a tournament play, a lot of times you do play traditional because there are advantages and disadvantages to this. For example, if your buddy won the previous hole, you might want them to tee off first so that you can get a shot and see what might happen to the wind or see where it rolls or something like that. So there is advantages to traditional play golf and the disadvantages and competitive edges. But if you're if you are concerned about pace of play or something like that, just play ready golf. So the next topic here is net score versus gross score. So the net score is, or let's start with the gross score. The gross score is the actual score you recorded on a hole. This is the one you wrote down on the scorecard. This is if you've swung the club 6 times, you put a 6 down. This is what PGA players play with. A net score is your gross score adjusted by your handicap. Go back to our easy example. If you get 18 strokes, that means that you get a stroke on every hole. If you got a 5 on a hole, your net score would be a 4 on that hole. You also can say net scores based off of the word for the hole. So if the par was a par 5 and you got a net 4, you got a net birdie, which is pretty cool. Easy way to remember which is one, if you have any sort of financial background with gross and net, it's going to be the same. If you get any sort of paycheck, then you're going to see a gross amount on that paycheck. And then taxes, deductions, all that are going to be taken out, and then you'll get a net number in the end. That's what you're actually going to get in your bank account. So one way to think of it. Another way to think of it is the gross score is usually higher, so you think like, oh, gross, like I don't want that score, I want the net score. So that's another way you can think of it, just a little memory trick there. And then the last one we have to go over in this episode is the maximum score you would record for handicap purposes. What this is saying is there is a score that you would no longer record higher than, and what that is a net double bogey. So you take the strokes you get on a hole, you add 2, and then that would be your maximum for that hole. So if it's a par 4 and you get a stroke on it, your par would be a 5. You add 2 to that, and then it would technically be a 7. That is what the maximum score is for handicap purposes. Now, that's not saying you pick up at 7. What that's saying is when you put your number in for calculating your score differential, you wouldn't put a number in higher than your net double bogey. The purpose of this rule is because it's trying to stop inflated handicap numbers. So someone can't just score they're on hole 18, they decide to putt it 30 times just to raise their handicap. They're not going to be able to do that. This is why that's in place. Now, whether or not you pick up, I think it depends on the type of match you're playing, how you're playing, things like that. So if you're playing competitively and your buddies already beat you, then I would encourage you to finish it out if you can. But if pace of play is important or you just need a break, you can probably go ahead and pick up at your net double bogey. So you can just kind of go hole by hole, see how you feel. But the official rule for handicap purposes is net double bogey. And that's it for this episode. So I think the game of golf is just really cool that, like, I've been playing for 15 plus years now, 20 plus, or probably close to 20 years in some capacity. And I'm still learning a lot about the game of golf. Not only from an athletic point of view, but just from knowledge of knowing the sport and how it can change from week to week, or it seems like week to week. It probably changes from season to season based off the USGA ruling and PGA and stuff like that, but it feels often. What does feel week to week is just learning. I feel like I'm constantly learning things about the game of golf, which is really cool. So that's it. I think I want to go over for this episode of the Birdie Board Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Birdie Board Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and share it with a friend who loves golf as much as you do. And before your next round, grab the Birdie Board app, free on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store, and let it handle the scoring while you enjoy the game.